way, Jason.
Cool. All right. Yeah, like Ryan said, Jason, let me get back to getting the slides. So this is going to be super technical talk. If you're not super technical, it's fine. Just follow along. I'll have links. I've written basically everything out as a tutorial series, which I'll have a link to, so you can go back and do it at home when you have more time, if you get tripped up at any point, or if something I say just doesn't make sense and we don't have time to go back and cover it. I'm actually speaking at WordCamp Orange County in 10 days or so this presentation is actually for that. And I talked to Ryan about doing it here as well. So yeah, there's a link to the slides if you want these slides. And then there's going to be links later to the Git repo of the workshop, the app that we're actually going to build. So slides.com/JasonBahl-1 and you'll find it on there. So about me, I'm WordPress engineer at Digital First Media. We work on large publishing sites, Denver Post being probably the one you guys know most. I'm a Denver native, been working with WordPress full-time for a little over 8 years now. Love open source software, WordPress. Creator and maintainer of WPGraphQL. It's a WordPress plugin that brings GraphQL to WordPress. This talk, what I'm going to cover, I'm going to do a quick intro to React and GraphQL, pretty high level. Not going to get too into details. And then we're going to do an actual workshop and try to get hands-on with some stuff and actually build some stuff with React, populate the React components with data from WordPress over GraphQL queries. We'll touch some Redux for state management, and we'll actually customize the GraphQL schema in WordPress so that we can get custom data out of it. So I just want to basically highlight why I even think it's important to know how to build single-page apps. So the modern web where we're at right now, the interfaces we interact with on a daily basis are reactive and stateful, as I like to say. You got Slack and Netflix or WordPress.com. So how we used to build apps way back in the day, like early 2017, 2016, way back in the day, we used to get stuff from a database. The backend would compile that data, compile anything it needed to build the entire page, the view layer, everything. It would compile it on a server, send it up to the DOM or your browser, and then anytime you made interaction, it would go back through the whole process. Everything would go back to the server, get whatever data it needed to from the database, compile it back on the back end, give you a full page on the client. Modern apps are transitioning, though. Your initial request will get data from the database and the server. We'll send as much as it can to the front end or the client or the browser. And then going forward, typically requests will be made that only sends data back and forth. You'll have the templates needed up front. And this is just a common single-page app flow and what we're seeing with a lot of modern apps like Calypso even being one of them, WordPress.com. So reactive and stateful in the web would be showing a response to stimulus, would be the reactive part, and state would be the particular condition of that someone or something is in at a specific time. So here's some example of some stateful components. So like I'm sure you're all familiar with Slack, but you can see as things happen, like I refresh the page, you see right away changes to what I'm doing. I can change the channel and it will react, right? The DOM will react to me, just the parts that need to react. Same thing when I post something to Twitter, I don't refresh the whole page, it's just a small part of the app responds to what I'm doing. Same thing with Facebook or YouTube. Even small interactions like this, when I click play, the video component actually starts playing, and the button responds to my stimulus, changing to a play state versus a pause state. So jumping in to what React is to help build stateful interfaces. If you're not who's used React before? Most people are somewhat familiar. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's an open source JavaScript library created and maintained by Facebook. It's declarative, component-based architecture. It uses JSX, which compiles down to JavaScript. It uses props and state to manage state keeps truth out of the DOM. So the data that's flowing through, like in WordPress even right now, like in the admin, we'll sometimes save data as DOM attributes or whatever, and then use that. So it keeps data out of the actual HTML. React, so components are the future of the web. There's an actual spec for components actually coming to the web. What is it, the W3S spec or whatever it is? But there's a spec, so components are actually going to be part of the future of the web. In my opinion, React makes writing JavaScript easy to understand. So even if you've never written JavaScript before, to me it feels like it just belongs in the web. If you know how to write HTML, I think it's a pretty easy transition to learn how to write React. It's fast and efficient. It uses a virtual DOM, which I'll explain in a second. It is isomorphic, meaning that you can write one piece of code and actually have it render on a server and a client. Which could be important for things like SEO. I think it's a pro that it's used and maintained by Facebook. There's obviously some heated discussions in the WordPress community on whether that's a pro or a con. If you're not aware, there's a discussion on WordPress core bringing in a new JavaScript framework into core, and React and Vue are kind of the two contenders right now. Some people say it's a con that Facebook's actually connected to React. So yeah, let's look at how React works. So to understand how React works, you have to understand the DOM, what the DOM is, and the DOM, so the objects that get rendered in the HTML are just objects, right? So we have a document object, we have HTML, we have head, we have whatever, and it's all presented as a tree. The browser takes that, presents it to you. React, the way React works, on initial render, it takes that, gives you the objects for the document to render. But then anytime things change, it uses virtual DOM to see what changed. So this is React and this is the browser. When you make an actual change, nothing actually changes right away in the browser. React compares what should change, figures out the minimum pieces of data or components to re-render. Once it figures that out, it re-renders, and then your browser DOM, your actual DOM, is manipulated. So it makes it really efficient. We're not sending full payloads to a server, having everything recompile and sending us the whole page back. We just can re-render pieces of our application that have changed and require to be re-rendered. These are some links that are helpful resources about React. I've got some links to some code pens even on like building just basic React components. So those are helpful if you want to look at some, even like this one's actually pretty good. React and a Redux app to look through if you want to learn more about React and Redux. So GraphQL, who's heard of GraphQL? Who's used GraphQL? Who's used GraphQL with WordPress? All right. So GraphQL also a Facebook byproduct. So GraphQL open sourced by Facebook. They've been using it in-house since 2012. They open sourced the spec for GraphQL in 2015. GraphQL is just a spec, though. It's not. Facebook didn't open source a piece of technology. Technically, they open sourced a spec, and then lots of folks have created libraries around that spec for different languages: PHP, Scala, Java, Python, Ruby, basically any language you can think of, Go, basically any language you can think of. Server-side language has some sort of GraphQL implementation at this point. So GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. So whatever app you have now can be added to that. GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of the data in your API. It gives clients the power to ask for exactly what they want or need and nothing more. It makes it easy to evolve APIs over time and enables powerful developer tools. GraphQL.org is a great resource, has lots of info. So I'll break that down real quick because I said a lot of stuff there. So it's a query language for APIs and it uses existing data. It's a complete and understandable description of the data in your API via a schema and a type system. The client, the person or the consumer of the data controls the model. They ask for what they want in the shape that they want it, and they get it back in that shape. It's easier for versioning and powerful tooling. So let's take a look at how it compares with something you might be familiar, like REST. So this is a link to, is anybody familiar with swappy.co by chance? It's the Star Wars API in REST, so you can browse Star Wars data, so something we might be familiar with, in REST, and then we'll look at the same thing in GraphQL just to get an idea of what some of the things are. So here's an example of a REST request to get some Star Wars data. So the request here is, if you can't see it, it's people/1, and it returns an object, name, height, mass. So we got Luke Skywalker, we have his height, we have his mass, his hair color, all this stuff. The films he was in, the species, which is human, the vehicles he drives or whatever. So you get all this data. You ask for a person, you get all this data. Whether you need that data or not, you get it all. So same thing, I could put in something like Starship 3 and request that, maybe. Or maybe not. Did we get that? Did we get it? All right, there we go. So starships with the ID of 9, I get the Death Star, I get all this data. So REST is implicit, which means the data coming back to you is applied. It's not explicit where you ask for what you want. So here we say, give me Starship, and then I just got to guess. I hope this data comes back to me, because you don't really know. There are potential ways to know, but overall, like when you're debugging code that uses a REST request, you usually have to spend a lot of time looking for documentation because you're not sure exactly what's coming back from that request. That endpoint may have been versioned at some point that you didn't keep up with, so it's a lot of mental load to keep up with using REST to get data. So this is the same thing using GraphQL. This program is called GraphQL. It's an IDE for just playing with GraphQL queries. So this is a demo using GraphQL, and this is actually using the same REST API we were just looking at. It's just wrapping the REST API in GraphQL, and it'll allow us to write queries for the data that we want, and we'll get it back the way we want it. So I can write this. I can write this query. This is the demo query that it loads. So we're asking for all films. We're asking for edges, cursor, node, ID, release date, and title. And you'll see that the shape that I asked for the data in matches the shape that I'm getting the data back in. And I can change this. So let's say I don't want the release date for whatever I'm building. Send a request. I don't get the release date. What else might we want? Since it's got a strong type system, a client can know what data is available ahead of time. So as I just started typing, I typed one letter and it's giving me fields back that exist on that type that I'm querying. So let's say we want the created date. Same thing, I can send this request. If I wanted for some reason the data to be in a different order, I could do that too. So this is just a demo using that exact same REST API. So the backend in this case is REST API. GraphQL is just the language to query that data. So the backend in GraphQL doesn't matter. It could be a database, it could be another REST API, it could be another GraphQL API. It could be statically defined data on your server. Yeah. Yeah, in this specific case it is. Yeah. This is just a demo to give you an idea of what REST looks like compared to GraphQL with the exact same data set. So let's break down GraphQL. This is kind of the hello world of GraphQL queries. Asking for me and the name, and you get it back in the shape that you asked for it. Me and my name. So this, let's move over to what it might look like in WordPress. In WordPress, we can run a query, let's say get post. Let's say we knew the ID of the post. We can say post ID. I want these fields, title, link. If you're running a plugin called bylines, you can ask for the bylines, which would then give you an array of bylines in that same shape that you asked for. And we'll get a lot more into queries in WordPress too. So one common thing people get confused by, the name GraphQL. Graph does not have any relation with graph databases like Neo4j or other graph databases you may have heard of. It also does not have anything to do with graph search, which I think Facebook implemented in like 2013 or something to search Facebook data. Nothing to do with either of those things. The graph in GraphQL stands for application data graph, and the QL stands for query language. So it's a query language for your application data graph. What that means. Let's look at what WordPress as an application data graph looks like. So in WordPress, we have things like posts. Posts have attributes like titles. Titles resolve to some value like hello world. Posts can be connected to things in WordPress like bylines or authors. Authors or bylines can have names, and names can resolve to data. Posts can have multiple bylines potentially, and that multiple byline can connect to something else or resolve to different fields. One byline might have two posts, and that other post might have the title as well. So you have this graph of data, right? If you think of WordPress as a graph, you have different things that relate to each other. There isn't necessarily a start or an end point. I might at any point want data about this post, or I might want data about this byline. If I want data about that byline, I might want data about the post it's connected to. So there's not, in a graph, there's no start or end point. There's just points that you can access data and then go from there. So GraphQL lets us pick trees out of that data graph. So this is what it might look, this is what that exact query might look like again. So we had our post that had bylines. So again, in that context, we can ask for a specific post. You can ask for the title, the link, and the byline for that specific post. So if we look at that in the exact same data graph we were just looking at, this is what I would get. I asked for one post and two bylines. So we're only getting part of the application data graph with our query. We're not getting everything, just what we asked for. And this is what it looks like as a tree. So we're plucking data out of a tree. So we get a post. The post has bylines. Post has a title. Bylines have names. So we get this data back. So behind the scenes, what GraphQL is doing, you send a query. This runs the root query. And then this is called a selection set. So our selection set on the query would be a post by ID, whatever we pass it. And then the selection set on the post would be a title. In WordPress, it runs a function to do GraphQL request. It then uses native WordPress code, get the post based on the ID, and then resolve the field that we asked for, post title. So it's yeah, let's do some live demos. Yeah, forgot about that. Let's see. Might have to flip back to this. So I want to show you some features. So this is actually going to be. Let's see. All right. So this, I think we forgot to actually send out in the prereqs, so my bad. But it's a desktop app called GraphQL. So you can point to any existing GraphQL endpoint and test your queries. So I'll just demo some features. So this is the actual instance. If you had a chance to download the Flywheel instance that we provided, this is that running on my machine. So if you have that running, you can get this GraphQL app. You can just Google GraphQL desktop app. If you're on a Mac, you can find this version. If you're on a PC, I don't know what to tell you, sorry. But so I'm just going to show you some features. So this is actually WordPress running WPGraphQL plugin. It's the only plugin on this install that's running. I'm pretty sure. Maybe Hello Dolly. I can't remember. So one powerful thing, I'm going to highlight these features. So documentation. So in GraphQL, it's based on a type system. You define a schema, what types are available, what fields types have. Fields can be a scalar value like an integer, a Boolean, a string, what have you, or it could be another type, which then resolves to one of those values. So in defining the schema, you define not only what the type is and what fields it has, but also descriptions as well. So you can actually easily browse what's available by the server. So in this case, in WordPress, the current state of the plugin has a lot of the core data. So we have categories, or a single category, comment or comments, media item, which is attachments, or media items, pages. So a lot of the core data you would expect to be able to query if you were actually in PHP in a WordPress environment. You can query from outside of WordPress like I am now, just sending a network request, asking for the data and getting back. So let's look at a quick sample. So here I'm asking for a list of posts, the edges, the node, the ID, the link, and the title. Send that request, I get back a list of posts with the ID, the link, and the title. I'll take a step back and explain what edges and node is real quick. So in Graph, there's like if you think of data in a graph, let's see, come on. Yeah, so if you think of data in a graph, each of these is a node. This space between would be considered an edge. So if I ask for a list of items, there could be this space between. So like a classic example in Facebook would be, I'm a Facebook user, you're a Facebook user, we're friends on Facebook. There's data that only exists in the context of our relationship, like the day we became friends. It's not a property of me, it's not a property of you, it's only a property of the context of our relationship. So if WordPress had term relationship meta, that would be essentially an edge. It'd be context only in the, it'd be data only in the context of a relationship. So WordPress doesn't actually have that, but the shape of GraphQL queries follow that so that we can have a space to put that kind of data. So this is like a list of posts. Let's see, we looked at documentation. So doing a post list. So variables, GraphQL supports variables. So you'll see this knows what's valid or not. So you'll see if I'm doing something invalid, the tool tells me already this ain't gonna work before I even try to make it work. You see the red squiggly line, right? So in GraphQL, to define a variable, you say what the variable is. So in my case, we'll do like number first. And it's going to expect an integer. And I can pass arguments to fields. So in my case, I want to get maybe the first 20 items, or let's do just the first one item. See, it even knows I'm mistyping. So I can pass an integer like 5. So this is one request. It keeps our query a static string, and then variables are a second part of the request. So the query request being a static string by itself allows us to potentially cache on the server, potentially even give like Facebook in-house actually caches their full query on the server, gives it an ID, and then they whitelist or blacklist queries, so the server already knows what queries are allowed to run, and then the network, your client can make a request with just the ID, which will then invoke the query to run. So instead of actually sending this data up to the server, you're just sending an ID that knows to run that query. So it's very powerful stuff. And then you define variables in a separate request. We can look at actually this is an Electron app, so we have DevTool access here, so we can actually look at what's getting sent across the network. So this is what the request looks like. I know that. Let's see if I can do that. So the request sends a couple things. It'll send the name, which I defined up there. It'll send the query as just a plain string, and then it'll send the variables as either a string or a JSON object. So that's what a request to a GraphQL server looks like. So let's see what's next. So nested relations. So if I'm querying for posts, I can also query for nested data or like related data. So something like an author, which has a whole separate place in the WordPress database, right? So I can ask for something like username. So if these had the author, yeah, so you'll see all these are username demo because I populated them with the demo user. Or you could get something like the featured image, and then the featured image has a type defined, so we can get whatever data we want from that, like an ID or say the source URL. So I can query this rich data as a graph, ask for what I want, get back what I asked for. I don't get all this extra stuff that I got to debug like you would in a REST request. So it takes the mental load off of things quite a bit. Let's see. I'm going to skip some of these. Pages, same thing as posts, basically. You can actually do multiple root queries. So let's say I want to do one query for posts, one query for pages. So in this case, I can send, I don't have any pages in this, so I guess that's bad. So let's see. We'll just do it with pages or posts again in different shapes. So here I'm sending, I gotta erase that. So I'm sending in one request. I'm saying, give me a list of posts with the link in the title. So I get the link in the title. But also give me a list of posts with all these extra attributes. So here I got my link in my title, and here I got a list. So I can ask for multiple things in one HTTP request and get back stuff to do what I need to do with it. So very, very powerful stuff. Hiding my cord. It does. So let's see. All right, so that's an example of an alias as well. So I put just the name of the field with the colon before, and when I get it back, it comes back as more posts like I asked for it. So I can do that with any field in a GraphQL query. So if I want edges to be, like maybe we already built a client-side application that has a React component called list or items, right? And we want these to come back as items, and each item we have called item in our React component. We don't want to have to take the data and reformat it into what our React app already has. So I can do right here in the query. I can ask for stuff to come back as more posts with an array of items, there we are, and then each item, right? So I can translate stuff in my request to come back. So it minimizes the transformation layer on the consuming side. You can also do something powerful called fragments. Yeah, sorry. Something powerful called fragments. So if you find yourself querying a lot of fields multiple times, you can break it up. We'll call this like, so we can define a fragment. So we'll say whenever we query a post, if the type being returned is a post, I want the ID, the link in the title. So I can run this. I'm still going to get the ID, the link in the title in my response. I can use this again, let's say here. So now my first request, I'm getting the ID, the link in the title. My second query in the same request, I'm getting the ID, the link in the title. So I can break up my queries into reusable pieces and use them in my requests throughout my application. So all at the query layer, right? This is just making a response or making a request. Another super powerful thing that not only can you query data, but you can also query the schema. So you can actually do pretty powerful queries. Oh, did I quit that app on accident? So you can run a query. This is called an introspection query, which will give me details about what types of data are available on my system, which is what runs to build this documentation. And then I can do pretty cool stuff like, let's see. There we go. like apps like this know how to read that. So I can paste my introspection query for my application into a tool like this and see what my whole application graph looks like. Pretty cool stuff. GitHub also, just side note, GitHub has a public GraphQL API that they announced in March or so. They have a graphical app that you can actually go to and play around with the GitHub GraphQL API as well. So let's look at an example of using GraphQL to build a client-side component in something like React. This is actually a component in Calypso or WordPress.com. This would be a potential example of how you might build it with GraphQL query. So one request to get this data. And then we'll show how this works piece by piece. So we have a grid of articles. So we send a GraphQL request asking for a post, the edges in the node, which would give us the post object. We'd ask for the author, the name, the avatar, and the URL of the avatar. We can even pass an argument to the avatar, like the size that we want to receive back. So here we get the data that we need to build this part of the component. We could then ask for the site, and in this case we need the name of the site and the link to the site. So we can ask for that data. We would potentially need the follow link so that we could add the link in the top corner of each of the items. We would need the title to output the title. We would then need a featured image. Let's say we want it to be width 300 and we need the URL for it. And then we would need the excerpt for the post. So in one request, we can get all this data to build this out. If we did this in REST, we might have to hit an endpoint for authors. We might have to hit an endpoint for the sites. We might have to hit an endpoint for the featured image. Who knows what else. So in one request, we can get the data we need. So now it's workshop time. Now I've told you about React, GraphQL. Any questions before we start diving into some stuff? I know I covered a lot.
So when you were using the GraphQL React, you were getting that point. It was getting the API for that, but not getting the plugin that you installed on.
Yeah.
And that was creating the
Yeah. So yeah, it's not a. I did show at the beginning the Star Wars one that is a wrapper for the REST API, and WordPress it's next to the REST API. It has no direct connection. There's potential to be some connection behind the scenes, possibly. Like I know HumanMade actually made an extension for the GraphQL plugin already, so that if you have meta fields registered for your REST API, it converts it to a GraphQL schema. So in their case, they have hundreds of fields for various types of data. So it's actually a very small plugin, but works pretty well. So GraphQL has a mandatory type system, though, where the REST API has an optional type system. So you can register a REST field with no schema. In the REST API, GraphQL, you can't do that. You have to have type defined. And we'll actually look at that in the workshop. So WordCamp Orange County, which I prepared this for, is superhero themed. So I built a little WordFlix, right? It's a superhero movie database, right? So all in WordPress. So if you had a chance to download the local install and got that fired up, you can maybe follow along. Otherwise, we'll just go through. I have all the steps written down on the website, WPGraphQL.com, which I'll have a link to in a second, so you can follow along at home. I'll actually make all the steps into a video too, so you can follow along who needs it. So that's an example of what we're going to build. It's going to have a home page. It's going to have a list of movies with pagination. Each movie you can click into to see details about the movie. And then at the top, you have navigation back to home or the movies list. So really super basic, but all the data is coming from WordPress and GraphQL. Here's the links if you want to write those down or whatever, if you didn't get a link to the slides. But the top is an actual link to a tutorial series. WPGraphQL.com series, I've got basically 12 posts that go through all the steps to build the app. And then I have a GitHub repo, which I tried to organize extremely well. So if you go look at the commit history, every single commit, the diffs are pretty small, and every commit has a detailed explanation of what I did and why I did it. So you can follow along with the Git repo, probably without a blog post, but blog posts are a little bit more in-depth. But all the commits have a lot of details. You can look at the diffs, so what changed and whatnot. So let's see. What time do I have to now? 7:30? Okay, cool. All right. So does anybody have the local? Was anybody able to get the local instance set up and running? Kind of.
What is the admin using?
Demo. I'm pretty sure. Try that. Make sure it
I
works.
will try that.
Yeah, if you got in demo. If not, I'll try to make it easy-ish to follow. So if you did get it set up, yeah, you should be able to log in, demo. So the local URL would be graphql-workshop.dev, assuming you didn't already have that name registered in your host file for something else. So I went ahead before and populated WordPress just a post with a bunch of data from the movie database. So called the database, populated a bunch of movies in here. So we got the title, we got like tags, we got thumbnails and whatnot. Yeah. Whoa. Whoa. Yeah, so, and then there's also some post meta, which I can show you, which we'll actually make use of in a little bit. So one thing about local, if you haven't used local, I think it's actually pretty sweet. But yeah, you can connect to like SQL Pro or something straight from local. So we can actually look at like the post meta. Let's see if I can. This doesn't play nice with zooming. This isn't super essential. I just explained some extra fields I saved. But we have like the poster path, so the URL to the image. We have like the release date, popularity, vote count. So just a bunch of data that the movie database provides that I called and populated here. In this case, we're only going to take advantage of one of these fields, but you can play around and add support for the others. So we're going to actually add support in the app for release date, which is not part of the WPGraphQL schema. If you had a field in your post for release date, you'd have to add support yourself for that. So we'll actually look at how to do that in a minute. Let's see. All right. Oops. All right, so if you did get the WordPress database set up, or you can maybe go to the GitHub repo and look at the steps in there as well. But the way I set up the local install, which is also probably why it's heavy, I set up the theme. I set up 12 themes in there, so one theme for each step. So if you want to go with things, you can work. If you get lost, you can just go to the next theme and see the state of it. So if we look, come on. No. Let's see. Of course. Come on. My local instance, of course, is not happy with me now. Alright. Yeah, so we'll have 12 themes if you want. If you do get this installed, you can just activate and see the state of each. So is anybody familiar with Create React App by chance? Alright. So Create React App is a utility Facebook open sourced also. I believe Facebook did. Somebody in the React community. So it's a command line utility, allows you to run one command, create React App, that will set up a boilerplate React App. So the first step, if we go here, I provide a super basic WordPress theme at step 0. So step 0 in the theme, we have an index.php file which has almost nothing in it, basically the minimum to be considered a theme. We have a functions.php file that requires 2 files, an empty GraphQL.php file that we'll use later, and a nearly empty setup PHP file, but I'll explain what's happening here. And then style sheet, which is empty, just the minimum to be a WordPress theme. So we have very little to go on. In the setup.php file, we have just some very, very basic WordPress stuff. So at the top, I add theme support for post thumbnails. So in the WordPress admin, we'll have the featured image box, pretty standard. And then these two, the next two filters and actions, we just add the featured image to the post column. So when I was looking at the admin, we saw the movie posters here. So super basic stuff. And then the next 3 things, or I guess 4 things. So when you do install create React app, the first step of the tutorial, if you follow along in the written documentation, we'll create a directory called assets in our theme. We'll run create React app, which will create this app directory and get us just a few files. And the first step has us clean that up, and then we add just a few functions to get data out of that. So create React app, when you compile assets to static assets, it will provide what's called a manifest.json. Oh, can I open the wrong one? Sorry, asset manifest.json. So every time you compile a create React app, it will create new static assets with a unique hash. So the functions we create, and this is all written in the tutorial as well, these functions just read that manifest and then translate it into a URL that we can on-queue to our theme. And then we just use normal WordPress scripts to on-queue the script and on-queue the style. So just 4 functions right here, and we have a create React app running in our dashboard. So I will activate step 1 here so we can see where we're at right now. So when we very, very first start, if we look at the so this is what we start with if you started, when you get to step 1. So we have create React app. So if we look at DOM, all that's happening, we have that index file that we started with, which is almost nothing. So it's almost nothing. It gives us the head with running WP head, a body class, and the WP footer. Then our functions file that we created reads the assets from the manifest, on-queues the styles, the styles and the scripts that create React app creates for us. And then React takes over from there and renders to the root, and then going forward we have a React app. So React is doing everything now. So we're actually in WordPress. You can see I'm in WordPress, right? But our theme is a React app. So we'll be doing extremely little PHP going forward. Everything else will be JavaScript. Did I go over anything that didn't make sense? Does anybody have a question? All right. So the next step, once we get to this point, the next step in the tutorial would be to clear out basically all the stuff that React gives you. So let's look at what create React app gives us. So inside assets.app, which is the directory we're going to spend most of our time in, you get a package.json file. If you're familiar with NPM, this just defines what scripts you have to use, what JavaScript libraries you can use. Create React app adds a pretty key dependency called React scripts as a dev dependency. Let's see. It's not liking zooming in on here. Oops. Oh wait, it's a different command. Yeah, I can't get it. What's that? All right. So How do I navigate that? All right. Ah, nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, behind the scenes, create React app adds this dev dependency called React Scripts. React Scripts does tons of helpful stuff. I'm not going to get into all the details, but it sets up a Webpack build for you. If you're not familiar with Webpack, it's a build tool that compiles JavaScript libraries. So in our case, we can write ES6, which is like the next version of JavaScript, right? That's not technically available yet. Webpack will build ES6 into today's JavaScript so that we can use it in the DOM. It's got all sorts of great like error handling tools. So if you make a typo in your application, it will tell you. So there's just lots of great stuff. So that's kind of what you get for Create React App. It also adds obviously React and React DOM, and then it gives you some scripts to start your app. So from this directory, you can enter dev mode. Let's see. Let me navigate to my local. Oops. So I'm just going to navigate to my local by Flywheel site. I can't remember the path. All right. All right, so I navigated to theme 1. I navigated to the assets app. That's where we created our React app. If I'm in this directory, I can run npm run start. This will, I have to run npm install, sorry. So one thing to note about JavaScript projects, npm scripts we are ignoring. So npm is all our dependencies. Why is this taking to a different project? Come on, Storm. Oh, there you go. Plan 1, you say? All right. So, yeah, in a JavaScript app, you'll have in the source, let's see. Okay. Yeah, in a JavaScript app, the package will define dependencies, which will get installed in a node modules directory. So by default, those aren't installed right now. React Scripts includes a lot of those dependencies, and then we'll add our own dependencies in this block called dependencies. We can run npm install. That will install all the dependencies. We'll see in a second. We'll have a npm modules folder when this is done, which is a lot faster when I'm not on this network. I probably should have ran Oh, gosh. Just to show proof of concept mostly. Like in real cases, like Jetpack, for example, uses React in the WordPress admin right now. So like the entire Jetpack interface is React. I think the entire, or most of it, a good portion of it. And it is like even, so 10up recently actually did a project for WAMU radio station, and the entire theme is built in React there, so the entire front end is React. Back end is still WordPress. So it's just a different way of developing stuff that I think it could. Yeah, yes, exactly. That's yes. Yeah, and that's you definitely can. So when I install, you can. So potentially part of that reason, you can take advantage of some of the authentication mechanisms. So if you're actually in the same environment as WordPress, you can take advantage of like cookie authentication to make authenticated requests, right? Yeah, yeah, like for using like WP localized script or whatever, so you can have data populate straight from WordPress. When WordPress goes to render the initial React app, stuff can be localized from WordPress, so that's one potential benefit. In most cases, yeah, like yeah, you don't have to be in WordPress, but it's just an example. So WP localized script, it allows you to take like data from PHP and load it to the DOM as like a JSON object, basically that your JavaScript can access and use throughout. So it's pretty common in like the WP admin and a lot of themes, like WooCommerce, for example, makes heavy use of it. So it takes PHP data, brings it to the client so that JavaScript can access it, basically. So that's one potential advantage, and then potentially authentication layers you could take advantage of. So yeah, so I got that installed. I ran npm run start. That will open up localhost 3000. So in this case, I'm running a dev server. This is running a node server to serve the app. In this case, I'm not connected to React at all. Or not React, I mean WordPress, sorry. You'll see here, though, I do have my node modules directory, which installs all the dependencies that React scripts has, which is a lot. So this first step, we basically just clear out everything that React has given us except for the index.js file. Yep. And I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to go to step 2 so you can see. So basically we just clear that out and then we end up with just one index.js file. So now we're starting basically from scratch. We have create React app build system for us, which is awesome. All the error linting tools and yada yada yada. So if we did make a typo, it'll give us good errors. For example, let me just make a typo real quick so you can see like some of the tools. Like, I don't know, let's say I fat fingered and did something wrong. You'll see here right away, it's telling me, hey, app is not defined, right? Because I tried to render app, but I fat fingered and called it app1. So right here I'm getting an error. In the DOM, I'm also getting the same error, so I can prevent shipping errors, right? Because it's doing a lot of work up front for me. So that's a lot of what Create React App is doing behind the scenes. Is basically giving you a bunch of tools to make it easier to not break your stuff before it's broken. So I go fix that, it compiles again. You'll see it says it's success, and then the browser you can see is refreshing, and I'm going to have my React app back up and running. But no. So that's some of the stuff React app is doing. Create React app is doing behind the scenes. If you wanted to, it does come with a script as well. Create React app comes with a script called eject, which will take all the React scripts, create a full package.json with all the dependencies listed out for you, and then give you like the webpack config files so that you can customize the build yourself. So that is an option if there's something you can't do with their setup right now.
Someone please noted that where is it?
Yeah, so it's part of the React scripts. It's all behind the scenes. You don't touch it. That's kind of the beauty of it.
So your box into like 1 and 2 comments?
Yeah. So there are some you can look. They do give you some properties you can configure in the package.json that you can configure some settings and they'll take advantage of that and do things. But some things you can't do. Like I think at the moment, unless things change recently, you can't do like Sass or less at the moment. But I'll show you an awesome alternative which you might like better. I like better. So yeah, you are locked into that. But if you want out, you can run npm run eject. It will eject out. I'll actually. If you're in dev mode, you can hit Control-C to get out of it. So we can run npm run eject. It's going to be, are you sure? Because you can't go, well, apparently I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah. Read the create React app docs. But yeah, you can eject and I'll give you all the files, you'll have the Webpack config. But then as Create React App evolves, you're not part of it anymore. Like here, I can update Create React App, and like any build tools that they added, I'll benefit from. Yeah, so I recommend installing it and just ejecting anyway, just to see what is there. I'm far from a Webpack expert. I don't know anybody that is. Yeah, so the first step, we're going to basically just clear everything out. So we're going to end up in step 1, we're going to end up assets app. We end up with step 2. At the end of step 1, assets app source index.js. So this is what we're going to end up with, and this is essentially our starting point. So we have just an app that renders just an H1. So let's activate that theme real quick. So at the end of step 1, if you follow the tutorial online, we'll be at this spot. So we'll have super basic starting point. All we have is an H1 to start from. We have one component, rendering an H1, that's it. So what we're going to build here, come on, presentation mode. How do I exit presentation mode? So it wouldn't let me. All right, so this is just a setup step. Come on. So we're going to import a couple things that we need. So at the very top, we started with two imports, importing React and component and React DOM. I think I skipped a step. And then here we're going to import a homepage component, which we created. Follow the tutorial online. We're going to create this homepage component. So, man, this is not. Learning a lot about hosting a workshop right now. Organizing files. So I'm going to move into my third step. Of course, I should have installed all these ahead of time. Sorry about that. Yeah, probably. That's good. What's that? Oh. Yeah, it is. Thanks. What is it? Wait. Yeah, maybe that worked. Genius. So when that refreshes, so instead of Sass, so I mentioned create React app. You can't use Sass or less, which is potentially downfall. You can use something called style components. Has anybody heard of style components? Sweet. Oh, come on. Yeah, it didn't. I don't know. It didn't like that. I didn't install the node modules. Yeah, it rendered a different version. Unless I made a mistake in this version of the game, which is possible. We should have the home page though, and I'm going to show you how to use style components. Alright, we're just going to have to pretend without some of the dev tools. So step 3, we'll look at the code. I'll activate the theme, which is the built file. We're not going to have some of the dev tools available, but so I'll walk you through the code. We have one homepage component now with some styles, a link with hover styles. We can look at our React dev tools. Maybe. There we go. So you have React dev tools. You can see each of these classes have a unique class name, which comes from style components. So let me show you style components. So we have here our homepage.js. In the index file, we're importing homepage.js. Homepage. Oh, come on. That my copying the node modules is like crashing PHP soon now. Yeah, I will make sure all my themes have npm installed next time I do it. What's that? Yeah, they should be. I don't change them from the first step. Well, anyway, I'll just walk you through some code and just show you the final product in WordPress, and you guys can do the dev mode on your own and explore some of the extra tools like Redux dev tools, which only will run, in this case, in development, not on production. So the actual built theme that WordPress is loading won't have Redux dev tool support. Also, Apollo dev tools. Apollo is what we're going to use to query GraphQL, which uses Redux to manage state of GraphQL queries. So you'll only have access to those if you run the dev server locally, so I won't be able to show you that. But what we have here is at the very bottom, we're creating just one homepage component. We output just a little bit of stuff, a section, a homepage component wrapper, section, home title, description, a link to a path, movies, an explore button that says explore films. Most of these components right here are built of what's called styled components. Styled components is a library that allows you to create components and apply full CSS styles right here in JavaScript. Unlike a lot of other CSS and JavaScript solutions for styling components, you have the full power of CSS. Like some like CSS and JavaScript solutions, you don't actually have CSS syntax. You have to do things like camel case, margin top, or something like that. With styled components, you can actually use real CSS. You can even do nested selectors. So in this case, I'm styling this home div, and I'm even applying nested styles to sections immediately under that div. So we can do things like change the color to blue, and if I was in dev mode, this would refresh right away for me. Since that's not working, it's not going to do that. But so I have the full power of CSS right here, right next to the component that I'm rendering, which is pretty big in component-based development. You can have the what's rendered in your component, the logic of the component, the styles of your component, and as we'll see later, even a query to populate the data of the component, all in one file. So troubleshooting and scaling your code base becomes a lot easier because things are coupled really close together where they belong. So that's why I don't think less or Sass is a downfall, because in my opinion, styled components is a great solution for styling things in React. You can, if you want to, create reusable styled components. Just like any other component, you can create a styled component in its own file and import it anywhere else in your app and reuse it wherever else you want. which we'll look at an example of that later. I feel like I want to try this one. Oh, is it? I'll have this go in the background thing. All right, so we'll move on. I'll have that build for step 4. So yeah, we can build this component. We can build style components, use them in our homepage component, and then in the index.js, we can import. Oh, I'm on the wrong step there. In the index.js, we can import that homepage component and then return it in our app. So now we have one component that is being rendered to our page with our applied styles. The styles get a unique style name. If you're familiar with CSS modules, it's the same guy that created CSS modules that created style components. So each class has a unique class name, so you're not going to run into conflicts, right? So anything using that styles is going to be unique to that. There's a great blog post by somebody who worked at Medium.com about just they have this bell icon in the top left on Medium.com. And I think if you inspect it, there's something like 700 lines of CSS that get applied to it, because over time, like scaling CSS is a nightmare. There's a great video you can look up by the Walmart team on, I think it's on YouTube, explaining like their hate of CSS too, because scaling it, they have 72 different teams working on stuff, and so they're actually migrating to using things like CSS modules and I think style components as well for a lot of stuff at Walmart, because CSS it's easy to create it. Initially, it's very hard to maintain over time. So this makes that a lot easier to maintain. You know that when you're changing styles, you're only affecting that component and nothing else, or wherever that component's being used. But you don't have to worry about changing a style of a button and anything that used like what in Bootstrap you have different tags like button and primary. But other things can use primary. So if you change primary from blue to green, you might have fixed your button, but you might have changed something else that's supposed to be blue to green. Like, oh, no. So it gets a little crazy. This cuts that out. It also keeps your styles in one place. So now you don't have to find the HTML in one place and then go navigate some CSS structure that somebody created some time ago and never documented, most likely, to find what styles you need to edit. So that's a huge benefit of using styled components. So let's look at next. Next, we're going to introduce some routing. So we're going to use React Router. I think React Router is at version 4 right now. When I was building this, I'm using like version 2.8. So if you're using the current version of React Router, there might be some inconsistency here, but I think overall there's a lot of similarities. So we had our app component that rendered the homepage. Now we're going to introduce routing. So what we do, we import our dependencies from React Router. I'm using a helper called useScroll, which allows us to, if you click the back button after you change a route, it'll take you to the same scroll position you were on the previous page. So if you're already scrolled halfway down the page, navigate it away, click back, it'll take you back to the same scroll position. So I'm going to use that. We're going to create 2 components. We know already from the finished product that we're going to have a movies page, which is a grid of movies, and a movie detail page. So I create these components just right here in the index file. So we just have movies page. It's going to output just some basic text and a link to the movie detail page. A movie detail page, which outputs a link back to the movie's grid page and the home page. And then we use router here. We add our router. We pass the history we want to use, which is browser history. And then we apply the middleware useScroll, which gives us the scroll position support. And then we set up our routes. So it's very easy to set up routes in using React Router. We give it a path. So in this case, it's /movies. And then it would be our movies page, which renders the point movies page. The next route would be movies/movie ID, which is a dynamic property. So whatever we pass to it is going to be considered the ID by React Router, which we can then use to fetch data for said movie. This last one is a wildcard, so basically any route you get that's not already defined, it's going to render. In this case, it's homepage. In a real app, you probably have like a 404 page or something. That would be your catch-all if the route is not recognized. Like in WordPress, for example, if you just go to some random route, it gives you a 404 page. In this case, I'm just doing the homepage as a catch-all. So that sets up our router. If I activate this step of the theme, we'll have basic routing set up. So now I can click that button. It's going to take me to the movies page. I haven't styled this yet, right? But it shows that we have a component there. It's the movies list page. I can click back to home, click back to that. I can go to the movies detail page. We'll see it change components that it's rendering. Movies list page, I can toggle between these, right? See the route changing, see the component changing. I can go back to home. So there in just what, like 6 lines of code or something, we have routing set up. This is the only file I changed for this step. So very little code at this point, and we have a multi-page single-page app. Right? So in the next step, we'll, I believe, style the routes. Yeah. So in the next step, we're going to mock up kind of the layout without data. So here I move so that our index file doesn't get too crazy. We create 2 new component files, or a couple. So moviepage.js, we move the component that we had in the previous file here, and now we create some new styled components like we did for the home page. So I create a movie details wrapper div, poster component for rendering our image inside of, and then this movie content div, and then I apply some styles to those. Right now, it's just rendering some placeholder data, the word movie description, the word release date, the word movie title. Same thing with the movies page. We move the component that we had in the index.js file out to here. And then we just write a bunch of repetitive columns to create our grid. And here we create a new component called movie card, which is here. So movie card is going to render a card component, which we're importing from a library called Ant Design, which is a component library. Check it out. I got links to it in the tutorial docs. So we use the card component to create this card layout. So it creates this kind of card layout, and the column and row layout also comes from Ant Design. So it's a whole grid system that you can pass properties to set like the gutter width and whether it uses flexbox or not. So you can set those properties. It'll help you build the grid. And then same thing with column sizes. You can pass properties to what size you want the columns to be. So you can see here, even for like the screen sizes, I say what column size I want at the various breakpoints so that we can have, you know, responsive columns. I didn't style that image well at this stage, but so we can see this grid can break down very easily. And then yeah, we build just a couple more styled components. So we do one for the page title because we're using some custom superhero fonts, right? We build one for the movies wrapper to be the container, and then we do one for the movie title so that we have custom fonts for these components. Oops. So we build that out with just kind of placeholder markup or placeholder components to build this grid out, and then we'll hook that up to GraphQL in one of the upcoming steps. Movie page, the same thing. We create a couple styled components and render them in our movie page component, which gives us just a kind of mocked up version of what we're going to have when we populate with data. And then in the index, what you'll see here, since both of those components, you notice have the same menu bar at the top. The homepage doesn't have the menu bar, but the movies grid and the movie detail page has this menu bar. Instead of creating that in both components or in both pages, we can nest both of these inside a route, which renders the page layout, and then our page layout can be a single component that contains that wrapper content. So our page layout will create a wrapper component, which creates, the black background and whatnot. And then it will create our menu bar for us, which is a styled component, which gives us the red look and the white links or whatever. It even gives us the hover color of black, so that when we hover, it turns black. I didn't compensate for the admin bar, my bad. And then it passes the children to the content. So the children in our case is what we nested as the routes. So we nested it. Yeah, so we have page layout, and then the children are these two nested routes, so the movies and movie IDs. So whenever we get to those routes, they're rendered nested inside the page layout. So we can create, whatever layouts we wanted. So we could have a dozen layouts and define the routes, and each route could have a different layout, right? So it gives us a lot of power, and then you can see very easily from an entry point what things are going to render what inside what layout. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And again, with not too crazy amount of code. Like right now, most of the code I'm writing is styles, like all these CSS blocks. Yeah, so next, after we create those mocked up template files, kind of have a structure to populate data into. Next step, we're going to configure Redux, which is our state management store, and Apollo, which is a client-side tool that connects to GraphQL endpoints and then uses Redux to manage data that's been queried from GraphQL. So in this step, we'll set that up. This has no visual impact. All we do is create a new directory called state and an index file here. We got 39 lines of code, and half of them are comments. So it's not much code going on here, but I'll explain it. So we import some dependencies from Redux, Apollo client, Redux logger, Redux thunk, which we're actually not using right now, so I could have left that out. But and React router Redux. Redux thunk, I'll tell you what it is. Since we're not using it, you're not going to see it doing anything right now. It's a middleware for Redux, so you can. Who's used Redux? Okay. All right, so Redux. I'll fix it. I can explain that a little bit. Redux is a client-side object, basically, that you, as things change in your application, you copy the object, change the properties, return a new object, and then all of your components can subscribe to that. It's to the store, which is just an object, or parts of that. And as things change, your React components can re-render based on that. So it gives you one place to pass your data around the client, and your components can subscribe to that or parts of it, and can automatically be re-rendered when things change in the part of the Redux store that it's listening to. It's got fantastic dev tools. I'll try to fire up. I want to fire up one of those right now. But all we do here, so we import those dependencies. Redux thunk allows you in the Redux cycle to return a function that can be used throughout your application, so you can store functions in your Redux store. Components can subscribe to the Redux store, get a function back, and then do something with that function. Basically, it allows you to do side effects when things change. Next part, we use Apollo client. We just create a network interface. So all we do here is configure the endpoint, the GraphQL endpoint we want to be querying. In that case, it's the WordPress install /GraphQL. The same endpoint I was doing my demos at with the graphical app. The next step, we create what's called a root reducer for Redux. So this is defining the shape of the initial Redux object, which has an entry point for Apollo, an entry point for routing, which React Router will then connect to store route changes in. Then we create what's called a logger middleware, which allows us to see pretty rich console logs as stuff changes in our app. And then we export a function called configure store, which we will use in the index file to wrap everything in provider from Apollo. So again, we only change a couple lines of code from our previous state of this index file. We import some dependencies. We instantiate our store and instantiate our history for Redux to make use of. And then we wrap our app. So before we have a router component, all we do is wrap that router with what's called an Apollo provider component. That gives us access to the Redux store, which then passes data down where it's needed. We pass the store that we configured in the other file to the Apollo provider and the network interface, which has the GraphQL endpoint connection, so that Apollo knows where to query to get data from. So again, we only changed, I think, 4 lines of code in this, but now we have a Redux app. I really want to fire this up. Apollo does work with just Redux. It doesn't work just with React, though. You can use it with Angular, Vue, whatever you want. But it does use Redux as the storage. I imagine there might be a fork of it to use something like MobX or Cerebral or something else, if you're familiar with those. I want to show the dev tools, so before I do this again, I'll have all these installed, I promise. Doesn't do you guys any good. So I'll let that install. We'll look at the next step, and then I'll fire up the dev tools to show you, because it's very powerful stuff. So in this next step, step 7, we are going to actually start doing some GraphQL queries finally. Yay. All right. And so step 7. So we're not going to touch that state file at all anymore. We set up the store, and that's it. Now we just can connect with it. So the first GraphQL query we're going to set up, we're going to go back to our movies page. We're going to write a query to get a list of movies with the properties we need, or the properties we need to populate that template. So what we can do, we can look at the layout, and I think we can figure out what we'll need just by looking at it, right? So we have a list of movies. In our case, it's posts, right? That's what's stored in WordPress, at least in this case. You can do custom post types, but so we need the post title, and then the featured image URL, and let's say an ID, so that we can link to the detail page. So we need 3 things, something like that. So we can open up our graphical IDE and play around till we get what we want. So we could do something like query posts, edges, node. We know we're going to need an ID. We know we'll need the title. We'll need a URL for the image. So we can just play around with this until we get the data we need. And we say, okay, that looks good. Copy that. We can take that into a component. Since it's just a string, it's going to work in any language that knows how to work with strings, right? So if you're building something in Python, you could go take this and put it in your Python app, right? You could just paste it. It's a string. In my case, I also added a name to it, but that's optional. It'll work either way. So we can paste the string. Here we're going to get the ID, the title, featured image. One other thing that I had set up in the local by Flywheel install, you can set up a GraphQL.json file in your project, at least if you're using IntelliJ, like PHP Storm or WebStorm. It might be supported in things like Atom, I'm not sure, but you can actually configure a JSON file, which will give you type ahead on your schema straight from here. So I have this similar power as the GraphQL app straight from here. So I can start typing in my editor, and it's going to know what fields are available in my application right here, which is pretty awesome too. It's called like GraphQL IntelliJ or something. It's for the PHP Storm or the IntelliJ products, but I imagine there's similar ones for like Atom or whatever other editors. You'd have to do some research. And if there's not, build one, because it probably isn't that hard. Yes. Okay. Good. Good. Okay. Yeah. So this is give it this name. String literal, something like that. It allows you to do this. It's actually the same syntax that styled components uses. So you build things in a string, and then like you can pass that through a build system like Webpack, and it can do crazy powerful things. So here we're just doing a string. Behind the scenes, in our case, Apollo will take that and will actually change the shape slightly. Because there's a few powerful things I didn't mention on GraphQL. Like type name is a hidden field that actually doesn't show up, but you can query a type name, underscore type name, and it will return what type of object is coming back in GraphQL. So Apollo behind the scenes will take the query, and on every selection set, it will ask for the type name. Because Apollo in Redux will normalize your data. So if you're getting a list of posts and you query the same post twice through different paths, it wants to make sure you don't have two copies of it, right? Because if you mutate that data or change the data at some point, you want it to be changed in both spots. So Apollo behind the scenes is using Redux to normalize your data again, so you have one copy of every object. That's also I forgot to mention too, the ID. In WordPress, we have integers as IDs, right? And you're seeing this random string as an ID. We can get the WordPress ID as well if you want. So each type has an ID defined as well. But this global ID is just base64 encoded ID of the type and ID together. So we can decode that, and you'll see it's post. So it's a base64 encoded globally unique ID, because this is one thing I skipped demoing. You can do what's called a node query in GraphQL, or at least in WPGraphQL. So I can take an ID of any node object, pass it to a node query, so any object, like as I'm monitoring stuff in my client-side application, if something changed, I might want to fetch, just like refetch, just a part of that data. And maybe for whatever reason, I don't know what type of data that is. Like, let's say you did a search, and maybe behind the scenes your search might return posts or images, which have different schemas, right? So if your search returns a post, I want this shape of data, but if it returns an image, I want maybe the ID and the source URL, because media items have source URLs and posts, if I start typing, don't, right? So in this case, I'm running one query. I'm saying if the object that comes back as a post, give me the ID and the title. If the object that comes back as media item, give me an ID and a source URL. So if I get a so I'll just grab a media item object ID real quick. So if we swap out this node query with the media item ID, see that? Oh, let's see. Did I copy that correctly? Or did I find a bug? Okay, I just pasted it wrong. So now we'll see my node query. I changed the object to be a media item, and now my node query is coming back with the shape I requested for media items, right? So that's why the global ID exists. So yeah, Apollo, though, back to your question, behind the scenes it converts this query to add a couple extra attributes. So if you don't request an ID, it will ask for an ID so that it can normalize your data in the Redux store, and then it will add a type name too. So Redux behind the scenes will store the data as a globally unique object, so that, let's say our movie detail page queries movie with ID 1, and our movie list has the same movie. Redux doesn't have to re-query for that same movie because it's already in a Redux store. So it uses string literal, and then behind the scenes it adds those extra fields to make use of. Yeah, so that's how Webpack, I believe, knows what strings. So like the styled components here use like this, styled whatever. So GQL is just their prefix so that the Webpack build knows what strings to parse a certain way. If that makes sense. I know it's kind of crazy. Yeah. Yeah. So well, it's ES6. Yeah. So and then what we're doing here, we're connecting a query to our component. So if you're familiar with Redux, there's a function called Redux Connect, right, where you take some data and you connect it to our component. So the component that renders is movie page. Our query is movies query. Apollo gives us this function called GraphQL that connects the query to the component. And if we look at, let's see, our React Dev Tools, let me activate that version. Okay, we do. So now we have our component connected to the GraphQL query. It's fetching data. We can look at the network request to see what is being requested. So if I refresh this, we'll see GraphQL request go out. Oop. So we can see a GraphQL request go out. The request is just a string. Let's see. So it's that same string that I talked about, but like I said, Apollo is appending some extra details here. So Apollo needs to know the type name so it can normalize our data. So this is the request that's getting sent to our server. And again, if I needed to, I could test this straight in here to see if everything's working. Right. So if I ever see a bug, what's actually cool, if I can get it loaded, Apollo Dev Tools. Please. Oh, I'm way past my time. Oh, shoot. Well, this doesn't fire up. Yeah. Shoot. Well, anyway, we'll see if that. Okay, here it comes. Please. Ah, yes. Okay, cool. So here, now we can actually look at Redux DevTools, which is super powerful. If you haven't used Redux, Jetpack uses Redux, Calypso uses Redux, WordPress.com. So you can download the dev version of Calypso, fire it up locally, and look at the Redux store there. Redux forces one-way direction of data flow, so everything goes in one direction, and the state tree isn't changed, it's copied, which allows for powerful stuff like time travel. So as I click buttons and change routes, you can see actions being logged here. You can see in my console the Redux logger that we set up also is going to log the actions here. So I can see what's happening. If I click into a route, you can see it gets logged. You can see what's happening, what's changing in my state at any point. I can use Redux then to time travel. So I can go back and forward steps. This could be potentially powerful for, like, you could actually save, like, let's say you had a client that is complaining about a problem. You could actually set up something to capture their state and persist it somewhere, pull it up on your machine, step through what they did to get where they got, and then potentially uncover a bug that you had no idea existed. It just makes stuff super predictable, but it also allows data to be managed in one spot on the client. So if component A changes something, component B doesn't have to figure out how to talk to component A, right? They don't have to figure out how to talk to each other. They just listen to this tree. They make changes to the Redux state tree, and then they listen to that. So the only thing that has to change is the Redux state tree, and then anything in your app can re-render based on what changes it's subscribed to. So that's some pretty powerful stuff. Also, Apollo, let's see, Apollo DevTools, where are they? Oh, wait, I'm in the version without GraphQL. All right. Let me try this again. I'm just going to skip to the last step real quick. We'll let that build real quick. I'll activate that theme, the last step. So we do just a couple more things. So we connected our grid, our movies page to GraphQL query. We then do the same thing with our movie page, our single movie page, and that query is just for a single page, so it looks something like this. So it asks for a single post based on an ID, which is a variable, which we end up getting from a React router. So our React router passes the ID in the URL. We get that ID out of React router, which gives us some helper functions to get that data. We pass that to the function, then we get the data that we need, like the title. And in our case, the release date, I'll show you the PHP code that we added to add that. And then we pass the ID, which would be a global ID like this. This global ID would come through in the URL. Missed the spot. So here, variables in GraphQL, you define what type of data it is. So validation actually occurs before the execution ever happens. So if the variable you're passing, in this case, it's expecting it to be the type ID, which is a string. If the variable I pass is not a string, like if I try to pass an integer, that's an invalid type. GraphQL is never even going to execute. So during the development cycle, you can know, like, oops, we did something wrong before you even ship code, right? So, like, you can actually hook this stuff up to CI tools. So when you push to your GitHub repo, for example, it can validate your queries, make sure your queries don't have typos like this, and save yourself production headaches. Which you can't, like, how do you do that with REST, for example? You know? So yeah, here we get the data that we need for our single post date, our single movie detail page. We also need the featured image URL. So this is all the data we need. So we take this query, we put that in the movie detail page, connect that in the same way, with one slight difference. I'm going to skip to just the finished product real quick. So So the movie detail page, to make use of variables. So this is the same string I just wrote in GraphQL. I define my ID as a variable, the type ID. Now when we connect our GraphQL query using Apollo connected, we connect our movie query to our movie page component. But now Apollo gives us an options parameter where we can define our variables. So here what I'm doing, I'm getting the route params out of React router. And I'm using the route params to get the movie ID, which we defined as the dynamic part of our route. So it's going to check if that exists. If it uses it, it's going to set that as a variable. If not, it's going to set null. Null is going to return us nothing. Then we'd end up with no data. So we'd want to have a fallback in our template to render like page not found or whatever, or redirect to a 404, whatever we want to do. So Apollo also does something helpful for us. It adds a loading state to the query. So if Apollo is loading data and you have no data to present, it gives us a loading prop in our component that's connected to Apollo, so that we can present something like in this case in I think step 10 or 11, we add this loading screen. So if I activate step 11 and we refresh here, as stuff's loading on initial load, you'll see that it's real quick, but you'll see that it's GraphQL. Of course it's quick, right? No, but yeah, so you see that spinner, and same thing, if I click into one of those, you saw the spinner just for a second. What's cool now, this movie is fully populated in Redux, so if I navigate away from it, it's going to load that one, but now I come back. If I go to a movie I've already been to, it's in the Redux store, so it never has to make another network request. It's instant. It's there, right? It's on my server. You can force refetches, which is probably going to be a common thing if you're building rich apps. Like when you go back to this route, you might have some sort of validation or caching validation that says, hey, if the last time you were here was longer than 30 seconds, let's refetch or whatever. So Apollo lets you do some of that stuff. So we add the loading there. It's just a super simple component. It just outputs a spin component, and then we use that on the movie and movies page. And then one thing we also did is add pagination. So when you get down to the bottom, we have this load more button. When I click that, it goes and fetches more data and appends it to our existing Redux state tree. And then Redux is going to append, or Redux is going to populate any components that are subscribed to that. So like something like WordPress.com or even Jetpack does, when you save settings, for example, it shows like a little bubble that says like settings saved, right? So when Redux says this thing changed, that bubble component can say, hey, Redux, did something change? If so, render this, right? So we could potentially have a list of, I don't know, we could have like a little red alert bubble in the top right that says, hey, a new movie was added, or whatever we want. And that component can listen to the Redux store. This list can listen to the Redux store. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So let's look at Apollo DevTools. What Apollo infinite scroll. Yeah, you could definitely easily do that here too. I wanted to show something a little more concrete to see what was happening without some magic. One other common thing that too you could potentially do is like that I've seen popular, like on hover. Like one thing you could potentially do on hover of a component, since the query is a string, you already know about what query the next component is going to need. On hover, you can actually run that query, so when you click it, you already have the data. So you can do some pretty cool stuff like that. I mean, that's not limited to GraphQL. You can do that with like REST or something too. Let me try to fire up this final one so we can look at the Apollo DevTools. Because the Apollo DevTools are pretty amazing too. Redux DevTools are great. Apollo DevTools are great. So to do the pagination though, while that's building, to do the pagination, so we're connecting our GraphQL query with a component. Now what we're doing is modifying what's returned by Apollo to our component. So we take the data that Apollo's already giving us. We have a loading, whatever prop, the movies, which is what's returned from our GraphQL query. Because in one of the other steps I missed it, so it's not post, it's movies. So we get the movies, which is our list of movies. Fetch more, which is an Apollo function that allows us to fetch more. And then we return that, we return the same thing Apollo's giving us, but we find a new function called load more entries. When that function is ran, we use fetch more to run the same query again, but we pass variables. And variables in our case is going to be a cursor. It's going to be the last position in the data that we queried for, which I'll show you in the graph in a second. We use the last cursor that we got to run the query to get data after that point in our data set. The results we merge this is an ES6 array spread operator. So we can take an array of data. This is essentially like in PHP array merge, essentially. So we're merging the existing data in our Redux store with the new data that's coming back from our query. So now we have a bigger list of movies to render. And then we replace our page info with the results of the query. And let me show you what page info looks like here. So to paginate data, let's say we're asking, let's post. So we're getting a list of posts. Each post edge has what's called a cursor, which is just a position in the bigger data set, like in our database of where we're at in the set of data. And then on each type, we can ask for page info. We can ask for the start cursor, the end cursor, has next page, which is going to be a true or false or Boolean value, and it has previous page. So we can see if there's data that way from where we're queried or that way, right? So we can paginate forward or backward. We have to pass a cursor first. So this cursor is just a position, like I said, in the data set. So I can say I want the first 20, or let's say the last 20 items. So we'll see. Yeah, let me do this. Yeah, so we've got a list of 10 items right here because we didn't. By default, GraphQL is going to give you 10 items, right, unless you tell how many you want. So in this case, I'm going to change it to 20. I'm going to pass it a cursor, which is going to be this object here, which is making of Avengers Age of Ultron. So I'm going to say, give me any data in the data set before that. I got the 20 most recent items at the top of my database, right? I want the items before that in the database. So I'm asking to get data before that. I run that query. I get the data before that. That gets returned in the response to my query here. I append that data to the existing data set. So that's how pagination works. Behind the scenes, it's still running WP query. There's a filter on WP query that does some non-WP query stuff to check the current position and then get data after that. It's actually a lot more efficient than like a postable page and page. So especially on big data sets, like we have like millions of pieces of data in ours. So that's actually a lot more efficient way to query because you're not actually skipping posts. And I think every post you skip is like 1 byte, which adds up when you have 4 million things or whatever. Yeah, so that's how pagination works. Let's see if this built, and then I know! Last thing, just Apollo DevTools, and then any questions while this is firing up? Any more questions?
Well, you mentioned the columns.
Yeah, in my non-scientific tests, it's a lot faster than the REST API. Mostly because so one of the big issues, especially depending on the REST API. So a common trend in the REST API right now in WordPress is similar to this: define all the stuff that might be needed by a consumer and stuff it in there. Like if you actually go to the .com API and hit the me endpoint, I think for me, I think it's 19,000 lines of JSON returned to me, which is massive. And in most cases, I probably don't need 98% of that. So in GraphQL, just the transfer of data alone, you get a big savings because you're only asking for what you need and only getting back what you need. So yeah, and if you try to build this exact same app using REST and monitor the network requests, GraphQL is going to be a lot smaller to get the data you need to build this. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with either of those. Yeah, GraphQL's got a pretty rich spec. So if you go to graphql.org, that's all it is a spec. And then, like in my case, I'm using a library for PHP that I'm integrating into the plugin. But it's just a spec, and then it's up to whoever to follow that spec. Where like REST is like an idea, not a spec. There's no official way to do REST, right? Okay, so it's trying to put like a spec on us. Okay, yeah. So GraphQL is like an official spec. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. But yeah, the power of GraphQL is like the one endpoint, right? So everything's query based instead of endpoint based. Yeah, so let's see if this fired up. Because Apollo DevTools, if we can show this, is pretty rad. Apollo, all right. So Apollo DevTools, it works hand in hand with Redux or with the Redux DevTools, but as you change routes, you can actually monitor the queries that are being run in your application. Then you can click into it, see what query was ran, and to debug, let's say something's coming back maybe different than you thought, you can run it in graphical straight here in your DevTools. You can then browse your schema straight here in your DevTools. You can search your schema straight here in your DevTools. So, like, what do we like posts, right? I can search your post, see what all exists here. One thing I didn't even get to is mutations. You can also write data with GraphQL. It's not just for reading data. So we can actually, I'll just do one super fast, but we can do a mutation. So let's say I want to create a post. So you can pass an input object. can be like title, I don't know, some title. We'll just call it Workshop Night. Content. It's going to ask for a client mutation ID, which is used to invalidate the cache on the client. And then mutations also act as a query, so I can ask for stuff back too. So I can say when I create this post, give me back the link and the date, for example. So I can run this mutation. I'm not allowed to create posts though because I'm not authenticated. So you can add HTTP headers here. Where is it? And then I'd have to base64 encode. This is using, right now it's using basic auth on I think it's the REST API basic auth plugin, if that's accurate. I don't know. Base64 encode that. Yeah, this may or may not work. Oh, come on. Yeah. Let me make sure I do it. You'd have to have some sort of authentication activated. Let's see, I'll activate. So the authentication will work with REST API authentication too. So I just didn't have that installed. Sure. But if I install the WP API basic auth, oh, is that only on GitHub? Anyway. Yeah, so you can pass the headers, the same headers you use for, so like in our case we have OAuth1 for the REST API, we can use the same OAuth that we use for the REST API, it's going to work with GraphQL. So in our case, if I put the authorization headers in, I can create a post, and then I can query back data about what I just created, which is powerful. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, right now we only have a couple mutations defined. I mean, as of only like a week ago, the mutations made it into the plugin. So right now it's only the post objects right now, but like term objects will be shortly after. And then like setting relations, like you'll actually potentially be able to create a post and set like a relation to multiple terms at the same mutation. So you can send one payload to do that. Yeah, it'll be pretty rich stuff. There's also an official GraphQL subscription spec. So you can write subscription queries, and then the server knows who's subscribed to what. You have to have some sort of like WebSocket layer that you have to implement, which WordPress won't have out of box, but you'll be able to potentially hook into like a WebSocket layer and actually subscribe to data live. So cool. I think so. Facebook thinks so. Facebook's been so one thing. Facebook has been using it in production since 2012. All of their applications run through GraphQL endpoints. So if you're on a Messenger app or Facebook for desktop, Facebook for mobile, Facebook for business, they're all running through GraphQL endpoint. So since 2012, they have I think like 1,000 types or something defined, and haven't had a breaking change since 2012, which is crazy because the tooling it has around it makes it easy to avoid. Yes, versioning, actually, funny thing, I've got it up right here. So here's an example of versioning. Let's say you had on the film, you had a director, or let's say, yeah, so you had a director as a string, but maybe you want the shape to be an object. So they leave the director as a string, they add directed by as a type of person that returns an object. So now existing consumers that were consuming director still can do it, doesn't break. New consumers can consume the new field and doesn't break. Yeah, but what's cool about that is since every GraphQL query is a string, unlike REST, you know what fields they're asking for, so you can monitor that And then once it's been like 3 months, 6 months, and not a single client's asked for a certain field, you can take it out altogether. So, because you know nobody's asking for it. Where REST, you know they're getting an endpoint, but you don't know what fields they're using from that endpoint. So you can't remove fields easily unless you control all the consumers too. Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah. So it gets interesting.
Thanks, Jason.
These slides have heaps of other slides if you were interested in learning more about the schema too. So. What's that? Yeah, I'll put all the links in the meetup page too. And I'm planning on making every step of the tutorial a video too, so you can follow it. Thanks for coming. All right, I need an npm install all the
Well, yeah, you could have done them all in the background.
No, I should. Yeah, I should have.
What meetup is it?
Denver WordPress developer.
It seems like it's hardly WordPress.
Well, yeah. We're trying to. Before it was, we were getting like 3 or 4 people, so we're trying to do more interesting topics. So.
That's like
I mean the whole API is WordPress. So.
Okay. I guess that's blurry in my mind on what lines are, but
yeah, that's for like
I mean,
more like. Because we've been doing that.
I mean, you could have done it in something like Laravel or
Yeah, well, yeah, this is just a WordPress meetup. So, and that's a WPGraphQL is a WordPress plugin,
right,
which is what I'm showcasing. So.
Have you checked out WordPress?
I have. My problem with that is it's just a direct layer on top of SQL, so you lose the entire business layer of WordPress. So like, yeah, it's a node. It uses the WordPress database, but it doesn't use WordPress.
Right.
So like, if you have users and roles and capabilities and filters and actions and yada yada yada, it avoids all of that.
I only understand some of this on the surface layer, but I did review that project.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool proof of concept. And then there's also one Scott Taylor at the New York Times is working on one of the same name, WPGraphQL, but it's a node server that wraps the WordPress REST API. So it's a similar project, but it's a separate. It's not actually part of WordPress. It just knows how to read the WordPress API, kind of like the swapping demo I showed, the Star Wars API at the beginning. That reads the Star Wars REST API, converts it to GraphQL. So that's the same project he's working on. But behind the scenes, it's still making like a dozen REST API requests to get the data to, which in my opinion is pretty inefficient. So, and he actually did a Twitter rant, like 12 long posts about how ridiculous the REST API is working on my project.
Awesome. Thanks, good presentation.
Yeah.
Good job, Jason.
Thanks, man. Thanks for learning a lot of drop balls.
Honestly, don't know how you condense that more without just going like super high level.
Yeah, well, if I had everything installed, and I
Like
think I
once
need to
you-
have like an outline right next to me.
And once
So
you
I can't
fire up
remember
like
forgetting like what's the next step.
once you fire a PHP storm, it's like turn up mud.
I think I'll probably go back. Well, I think I'll probably go back and do just screenshots, so I'm not actually like.
That's a good
And
idea.
only pull it up if like I have to. Yeah. I think that's
Nice
a
one, man.
way bigger room than this.
Yeah. I'll go back and do that, and I'll have like my links all lined up too, so I can go like step 1, step 2, step 3.
Nicely done, man.
Tomorrow, actually. Yeah, dude. Super down. Get some lunch. Be done by dinner.
Little did you know that Jason's already been building the dashboard for like the last 6 months.
I just did it. So
It's rebuilding.
Ooh, shiny objects.
Shiny Hollow?
But speaking of rebuilding, that's why you don't want to exactly. So as a project, just like it's changing.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
That's why it's not like
Pretty much anything I'm doing that is,
I think the whole JavaScript thing needs the WordPress needs to be like like what's his name?
This?
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna explain it to you.
Yeah.
What?
Get on your spaceship.
No.
You don't want to go to the moon because you might as well not.
Wait, is that our content
Shelter?
You should, hey, you find out something you can wrap your mind around. Just do this. Just do this.
We're gonna refactor the hub to be our content launcher.
Andre